You have to know your business. It doesn't matter if you're in construction, manufacturing, healthcare, you have to understand the business.
Welcome to the Power of Construction, a Procore podcast highlighting the industry leaders who are evolving their businesses today to forge a better industry tomorrow. I'm Sasha Reed.
And I'm Chris Lingiza.
And we are your hosts for today. Chris, in this series, we've been talking a lot around the productivity gap, doing some root cause analysis as to what is behind the productivity gap. And today we're going to ask a question I honestly do not feel qualified to answer, but it really is around our construction financial systems ready for next-gen technology? You being our tech evangelist, global tech evangelist, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges with this is that, we are rapidly changing in our industry. And a lot of the systems, especially around the financial side of the business, have been pretty stagnant for so long. Mm-hmm. And, we are in an industry, as we know, that doesn't love change so much. So to be able to adopt new technology, new systems, new processes at a rapid pace is just something that is very, very uncomfortable to our industry. And so we need to, I think a lot of us know we want to, but how do we take a step past that? And I'm really excited for today's guests because I think we're going to dive into this. So it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we've brought on our guest, Sam Cook. Welcome, Sam. We're so glad to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here with you.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you here.
Mostly because I feel very unqualified to really dig into this one. We're bringing in the big guns, if you will. I want to give a quick introduction for those of our listeners who may not know you on a first name basis. Sam is the Chief Financial Officer at Brinkman Constructors. It's a $1.3 billion national general contractor that is 100% employee owned. Sam oversees the financial accounting and technology divisions, playing a key role in aligning strategic plans for future growth and setting the organization's overall financial and ESOP, or employee stock ownership plan and strategy. In 2023, she was recognized as one of the Titan of 100 CEOs and C-level executives. She was also named a 2019 Top Influential Women in Real Estate by RE Journals, and she has served as a board member of the National Association of Women in Construction and as a member of the Commercial Real Estate Women, or CREW, in St. Louis. She's president and founder of Third Entity Group, a consulting firm offering strategic business, finance, and technology and supply chain directives to SMBs, and has held leadership roles in finance and operations with notable companies like Clayco, Brown Smith Wallace, and Escala. Beyond her professional achievements, this is the piece that I usually don't have a lot to say here, but you do. Beyond her professional achievements, Sam is a proud mother of a 3-year-old son, Landon, and you balance responsibilities of motherhood with your passion for fitness as an avid triathlete and runner, training marathons, and embracing a lifestyle of discipline and perseverance. I'm exhausted now, just being.
I don't know what it is about construction and triathletes, but there seems to be a lot of mix there.
Absolutely.
Maybe we just like pain and suffering. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's just interesting.
Yeah, we like pain. There you go.
It's the archetype of those who are typically attracted to construction as an industry are never those who like banking hours. There's a slight sadomasochistic component of those who like real challenges and overcoming challenges. And so it doesn't surprise me that it kind of blends into the physical as well.
Well, we like to wake up at 4 a.m. That's all I can say.
We've been conditioned to wake up early and get to work right away. And that is definitely one of the keys to being successful at doing triathlons.
Yeah.
Well, as we come to get to know you a little bit more, I kind of want to start our conversation looking at your background, having done some research on how you kind of came into that path as CFO. Your career spans a real diverse experience of roles within this industry, and it's created a very unique mix of experience. Tell us how that really shaped your path into the CFO role.
Yeah, the CFO. I started my career, I actually studied architecture. That's one of my first degrees. I studied architecture, and I always joke around that I used to dream I was going to be Frank Lloyd Wright or Santiago Calatrava, designing all these kind of buildings all over the world. And no, I end up in the business side of construction, and I love it. But definitely, even the architecture side has given me a different edge to what I do, and I like it. And yeah, so I started in architecture. Back then, I studied in Mexico. I'm born and raised in Mexico, so I studied in Mexico. I got my master's in architecture and construction management. Eventually, I came to the U.S., and here I got a master's in business, a master's in finance. But that's how I got to the CFO world. Really, because I enjoy the business side of the construction, understanding the ins and outs and what makes a construction project successful for the client and for companies. So.
That's great. And you talk a lot about the business side of construction. So can you describe a little bit more what your role as CFO looks like at Brinkman, and how, you're bringing a lot of that business knowledge from your architecture background, your construction background, to the office of the CFO?
Yeah, so first at Brinkman, we're a national general contractor where we build all over the country. We have 5 offices. And so I say that because it's important to the business, right? When we've grown a lot in the last 5 years, we've grown 33% just last year. And so you see that, and my role has helped us to establish the infrastructure for what a company that is growing needs. And so specifically to what I do, obviously I'm responsible for the finance side, the accounting side. Also, I'm responsible for the technology side. That to me is really interesting because I've been able to do a few things that combine my passion for finance and business and construction. But also risk management. Risk management is such an important part for any CFO and really for any general contractor. We manage risk. Really, that's what we do. Between doing that and analytics, I get myself busy all day.
I think it's oftentimes misunderstood the role that a CFO can play in an organization, especially around some of those topics around, risk management, right?
Yeah.
Data and understanding the business. I think oftentimes they just automatically get flagged as the accounting people, right? And there's just so much more to it there. And I think the ones who do it so well are the ones who really do start to give a kind of a bear hug to those other roles and responsibilities that the CFO can take on.
Well, I think that talks about how much the industry still is challenged on what is traditionally construction. And yes, traditionally in the construction role, the CFO was used to be more so a transactional role that used to help, to make sure that we had payroll, that we were making sure that we were paying subcontractors, and just very transactional. And I think over the last years, you're seeing a lot of more roles within this title that is diverse, that not necessarily comes from an accounting degree or from a CFO or from a CPA degree or certification. And so that has helped us to shape different perspectives. In my case, I have a pretty strong construction background that allows me to bring perspective and strategies that are, in my opinion, applicable to what the business is needing, whether it's operational or if it's growth or if it's cultural. We're able to kind of mix all those backgrounds and, provide options that operationally are doable.
Well, I think it's fair to say that you're really a true partner to the business, right? And trying to help them identify where they can go and how your teams can really support the way that the business operates moving forward.
Yeah, I think being a business partner, it's key for this role. I think now if you cannot work with operations and with all the other departments that help a general contractor work successfully with clients, you're not really being a strategic CFO. So.
One of the things that you shared with us when we were preparing for this conversation today was how your millennial mindset really influences. And I remember 10 years ago, the M word was just not a good word in this industry.
No.
And now millennials are in positions similar to yourself where they have a significant amount of the business that's under them. Talk to us a little bit about how that millennial mindset is a little different as you're approaching that CFO role, and where technology kind of aligns with your perspectives of the world?
Well, that even has evolved for me. I don't think I ever wanted it 5 years ago, 6 years ago to say that I was a millennial. Though it was obvious that I was a millennial because of the connotation that it came with it, right? But I think now these days it's pretty obvious that millennials, we have embraced technology. We live without technology, but we also been that generation who now, have grown our careers with technology, and we embrace it and we figure out and we've seen also what leadership can be without embracing technology. So I think maybe we have PTSD when it comes to that, and we're like, no, we're going to do it different. We're going to embrace technology and we're going to make it work.
Yeah. I remember debating about what year the millennial cutoff was to try to get myself out of being
1983.
Yeah. and so like, I think we play a very important role of bridging that gap of old school and new school, right? People that grew up with technology were very happy and, used to working with it, and then bringing in and learning the business without it, and now bringing the two together, I think is something that is a little bit unique that, millennials bring to the business side of construction for sure.
I want to focus a little bit now on maybe some of the more historical views of what's been challenging from a financial perspective for construction, and some of the resistance that's, at least on the technology side, I think we've seen around this integration of technologies. How much of the challenge for that financial role within the business is technical, and how much of that is cultural?
If you ask me, I think that cultural has and still is one of the main reasons why construction has not embraced technology as strong as other industries like manufacturing, like even education. Like when you see that education has caught up a little bit more in technology, that tells you something, right? Construction, if you look at the industry as a whole, we still, at least here in the US, we still build the same way that we've done in the last 50 years. Of course, we have embraced some levels of technology, but it really depends a lot on the project that you're building, right? It's not the same if you're building a high-rise luxury tower than a box warehouse, right? So the level of technology that you're going to apply is significantly different in the minds of a client. And we're still an industry that we customize a lot to the client. And I think that was okay. And that is still something that we have to embrace to some extent. But that has also put us in a position where updating technology, then it becomes a hassle because we have so many different processes and we do it different for here and there. Specifically to financial and technology, we have kind of embraced that customization for different projects, different clients. And so then make a new update, and it's pretty difficult to do so.
Yeah, we all want to say that we're client first, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes we will do whatever they want, which can sacrifice the process that could make us more efficient to really close some of those productivity gaps and to deliver that. I think the interesting challenge is the change is not just with technology. I think it's also with the process, which a lot of times has to go hand in hand with the technology. How have you seen that willingness to change? Are people more willing to change the process, or are they more willing to change the technology, or neither?
In my experience, I think that we're more open to the technology because it sounds edgy and it sounds sexy, that we're going to change the software and it's going to sound and look better. And, when the pitch for the new software comes out, it's going to be better, faster, and saves everyone's time. But then what we forget is that when we look at these technologies, we most likely are going to have to look at our processes. And then when you mess with my process, then that's when resistance and change, happen. And so I think that we still have many, many work to do when it comes to change in our processes and cultural. So that's still a challenge that in construction we present, because we have to move so fast too. Our projects, we can have projects that have to be done in 12 months and projects that in 2 years, and yet, an implementation and integration of something can take a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, I used to have an old BD guy who used to say, no matter what, the end date doesn't change, right?
Yeah.
And so whatever we're going to do, we have to do it while getting the job done, which I think, unlike maybe some other industries where you could shut a factory down for a short period of time and retool, we don't necessarily always have those options, right? And so I'd love to also dive in a little bit on some of the things that I think are necessary for some of that change that I think you've realized are really important as your role as CFO, and that is things like data, things like the IT, the infrastructure, the technology itself. You've kind of wrapped those underneath your role as the CFO, and I think of the other one as risk management, right? And so, why is it so important that those things are part of what you're trying to do as the CFO?
So I've grown a lot of my career using data. I embrace data. I like to make decisions based on data. And so doing so has allowed me to make decisions and propose ideas to people who may be reluctant to some of the things that I want to do. And so when it comes to my role, I make sure to have that in the back of everything I do, because it allows us to have a lot more meaningful conversations. And so as a CFO, I make sure to, at Brinkman, for instance, when I walked into Brinkman, we did not have a lot of data that was usable for operations. And one of the things that I made sure to do very quickly on is to partner. Of course, there's information that it's very meaningful for me as a CFO. For instance, if I'm talking about cash, if I'm talking about receivables, all these transactional data points that traditionally you want to be talking about as a CFO. But what I realized over years and years of my career is that those are very important for me, but it may not be very important or sexy for operations, right? When it comes to my project managers, project engineers, directors, executives, yeah, those are things that have to be figured out, but those are not the conversations that help us to kind of move to the next level. And so, for instance, data has been something that we embrace at Brinkman. We brought a great data analyst that now is a data manager. We embrace technology. We made sure to have, for instance, Power BI. And the reason is because, you can have a lot of information that gives you data points, but if you're not helping the business to make decisions, if you're not helping the business for the next 5 years, if you're not helping, you really are not getting them to think about the things that you're eventually going to ask them, right? So how can I make my company more financially strong, or how can I make changes in the processes if I'm just looking at the next 6 months or the problem that we have right now? And so data has helped us to open the conversation, to be more transparent, and to have more people accountable for what we're doing. And so that has been one of the things that I've worked pretty hard on. Risk management when I walk into Brinkman, again, a lot of general contractors who are growing rely on a lot of the old time processes, such as working with your broker, making sure that you have, points of context in the industry. And yet investing in risk management is probably one of the most important parts that a GCs can do. We are in the business of contracting, and contracting means managing risk up and down.
Yep.
And so for us as well was managing risk management through processes, policies, making sure that we have the best for our clients, best for our subcontractors, and to make life easier for operations. And so doing that, and then you mix technology. But, technology has helped us to embrace new processes for risk management, new processes for operations and forecasting. And so it's been, quite a process to make sure that we embrace all this within 3 years that I've been in Brinkman.
And I think, everybody wants more data, right? I think if you asked any leader, they'd be like, yeah, I want more data. I actually think we have data on the fact that our customers want more data. And it's like 48% of our customer base says that they could make better decisions if they had more readily available real-time information. But you balance that with nobody wants to be filling out data all the time in the field.
Right.
Is there a way that you've been able to convince the operations teams that, hey, this data is really important. It's actually going to be valuable to you, maybe not immediately, but how did you get them to come on board? What was the way that you worked with them?
So I say be careful with what you ask, right? Because we all want data, but then even I'm like, this is a lot of information, and I have to be able to prioritize what information really can be a needle mover. But the way that I think that it's been, and this has been all over my career, like I've always tried to apply this. Again, there's information that I want, but I have to make sure that I see the business. And for me, if you ask me, what do we do at Brinkman? We build buildings, right? That is our core product. And so it could have been easier for me, like I said, to go ahead and let's have the most data-driven and technological conversation around AR and cash and lien
that even
waivers
possible?
and all that, right?
It sounds amazing.
But I'm not sure if that would have helped a lot to have conversations that, would bring people and get engaged into, okay, we're going to change this process, or we're going to have this new meeting, or we're going to meet monthly to do this and that. And so one of the things that early on I start working on, and I think it's part of the success of being a business partner, is to look around and see, well, what I want is data, and I want everyone to embrace data. Well, let's come with the things that are meaningful for the different partners I have in the business. And by doing so, you're going to get them engaged and maybe not fully convinced, but you're going to get them hooked enough that the next time you come and say, what if we do this? Yeah. They may be more open to that. In my case, I started working pretty hard with our people department. And a lot of the workforce. We were handling a lot of managing data around new hires and turnover, and analyze what was going on in our goals. And so, or setting goals, even just the fact of setting goals.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things that I'm really keen on, which is setting goals, targets, because that helps us to know where we are in the process, right? And so I started working a lot with the people department. And again, I'm the CFO and I have my data analyst, and I remember telling them, you have a free resource for the next 6 months, for the next year, you have a free resource that is going to help you to build up your data. And so by doing that, suddenly we were talking about how we hire enough directors, how we hire enough project managers, engineers, and we had data that was easy to digest, not Excel spreadsheets that everyone knows that my Excel spreadsheet is the best Excel spreadsheet, right?
No.
But if you
no one's ever said that.
But my 20 colors in this Excel spreadsheet are very straightforward,
My
right?
conditional formatting is on point.
Right. But you change it every month, right? And every month
Yes.
there's a new password to open it. So in our case, we embraced Power BI, and what that did is that suddenly we were using a tool that suddenly was used by executives and by C-suite more naturally. And look how we brought something that it was more digestible than go ahead and start talking about FP&A and forecasting, revenue and profit, right? So we started with things like that, and then, for instance, the whole setting targets and goals. Then we start working with what would be our sales goals and our revenue goals and our gross profit goals. And because we're an ESOP, those are things that are very tied to everyone. Everyone wants to have visibility and transparency into those things, right? You want to know that if we set a goal, you had a say to some extent, depending on your role. And so suddenly we're like, okay, now you're going to start embracing using forecasting and data, but it was a process, right? And then, well, now that we're doing this, I'm going to throw maybe accounts for AR. And now I'm going to send you an AR monthly dashboard that we're going to see it. But don't worry, you know how to use it because you've been doing workforce analysis. And so suddenly digesting this information that doesn't come from a PDF wasn't a big deal. And suddenly having 4 different Excel spreadsheets sounded a little bit redundant, and people were like, yeah, we probably should just have one. And it's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's a great idea. And
it's almost like they came up with it themselves.
No, it really, I think everyone has the idea, but it's hard to kind of suddenly coordinate. And really what we did is provide the infrastructure, and then everyone can get together and decide what makes sense.
The thing I love about this story is, it reminds me, you've heard me tell this story before, of sitting down with our project executives and saying what are the 10 things that you care about? And building them an easy way to consume that every day. But also, more importantly, what does good look like?
Yeah.
Right. And so when you can have that conversation, people kind of take a step back and they don't care as much about the data and the technology. They care more about the question that they're trying to answer in their head. And all you're doing is providing them an opportunity to get an answer to their question faster.
Yeah.
And then they buy in. And that seems to be exactly what's happened for you, is then you could then serve them up with more answers to maybe some questions that they weren't even asking, but they should be. Right. And that has provided opportunity for you to have more meaningful discussions.
And I think what happens eventually is that everyone realizes that, again, we want our executives and we want our field people to be doing what they're fantastic at. And that is being on the field, meeting with our clients, making sure that, our pre-construction and our value engineering's on top, not so much trying to coordinate data that is not under a good technology platform. And so I think that eventually when you get to see that, you are more open to change.
And I think one of the things that you're articulating here is if you don't have a conceptual idea of what the value of that data is, it's very difficult to let go of the tools you have today. And so I think part of the thing that a lot of millennials in our industry have been really good at is articulating what that value is. And what's those who've been most successful in what I'll call change management or getting buy-in are those who can start with where the business has pain and start that transformation process there that doesn't require potentially as much buy-in for something like a financial ERP transformation, but allows the individuals leading those efforts to see what that data value looks like in their current conceptual state of how they manage risk. But one of the things that's kind of top of mind for me thinking as you're talking, Chris and I recently came back from a visit to the UK, and there was a very large contractor there, ISG, who unfortunately recently had to close their doors. And so I'm thinking about some of the existing realities within construction, late payments, and some of that cascading impact that has on the industry. What role do you think some of those realities have had on destabilizing the business of construction?
Yeah, well, I mean, payment is one of those things that I say construction industry does not forgive anything. From our subcontractors who in the last few years they've had really the upper hand when it comes to selecting who they're going to work with for. And the terms. You see that in we had recession 2008, 2009, but since 2018 to now, especially after 2020, you saw where the subcontractors we're too busy. We're building a lot. So we have to be paid quickly, fast. We have to be paid sometimes in advance. And so managing cash, managing the billing cycle just becomes so important, obviously, for any GC. And we've heard the term cash is king, and it's been just so used. But, you see the cycle and you see that, well, so how are we billing? Who is billing and who's approving? And then you see that we have process of approval and what is the timing and who is delayed. And then how does that delay the whole process? And then what is the compliance involved with it? Who needs to approve this? Do we have the correct lien waivers? Do we have the correct certificates of insurance? Do you have all these? Is this contract? Is there a change order? And you're talking about all these steps that if are not well coordinated, it's a circle of reference. You're going to have someone failing. And so is it going to be the client who's going to reject payment? Is it going to be the subcontractor who is going to have to resubmit? Is it going to be us that we're not collecting the correct compliance, or is the billing approved correctly? And so you see all this process that it's just so delicate, and yet it's still very manual and it's still very dependent on the process rather than, the technology and making sure that we have the steps figured out. You would think that we would have all this figured out by now, but it just doesn't seem like in the industry we do.
Well, there's a relatable story you shared around the idea of this compliance and emails.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit?
Yes, I remember.
Because I think this is very relatable.
So you think that, so I walk in and I'm like, well, we need to have a risk department and it's so important and this and that. And, some people were just, do we really? Like, we haven't had to do this in so many years. And so I come in and I didn't know how our processes were happening, right? But I knew we needed to embrace risk management, and I knew we needed to embrace new processes. But now I walked in and I started looking into the processes, and I see that all our subcontractors have to send certificates of insurance to an email, to an inbox that we had, right? And this is a reality for many GCs where we have figured out how to get around the process because we have to do it and we have to do it tomorrow. And so we had people going through this inbox, and I always used to think like, but how do we know that someone didn't delete one by mistake? And how do we know which one was the first one? Who clicked here? And so you review it, and if you have questions, you have to reply back to the subcontractor. That might have taken so many days. And most important, our operations people don't know that we're doing that and that we may need their help to get that information. But
exactly.
You see all this process, and then you look around and you're like, well, if we embrace technology, first of all, there's AI that can help us to look at certificates insurance instead of having people trying to kind of check boxes. It's, AI helps us at least with the very first filter, right? And in our case, we embrace pretty early on Jones, a software that works together with Procore. And, we still, of course, have to reach out to the subcontractor, but the process is tracked, and we don't have to worry about the inbox, right? We have to worry about the subcontractor loading the file, and that helps us to kind of, at least we have a few steps ahead, and that technology will only get us smarter and smarter, right? And so it's crazy how, trying to embrace change may end up being something that the whole company realizes that, well, why were we doing that? Why were we sending this information? And that is your small wins. I call it small wins. You have to look around, and those things that are going to make people's life easier, those are the ones you have to take quickly and embrace it, and use that one for your next initiative.
Well, I love the small wins, right? I mean, you think about insurance, like every project has to track it.
Yeah.
Everyone on that project probably has had to deal with it at some point or another. So, that's a technology or a solution that touches pretty much every role that's out there. And people are like, oh yeah, just thank you. Thank you so much for making that.
Insurance is one of those things that no one wants to be expert at, right?
No.
Like you don't want to figure out, like,
lawyers want to be experts at that.
But I don't want my project engineer trying to figure out, is this document the right one, right? You want to have a department, but you also want to have the right technology that help you to kind of filter that. And so that is the goal.
Yeah, I love this idea. And you brought up Jones, you brought up the fact that, like, hey, it's integrated into Procore. How has the introduction of like more integrated platforms, we're talking about payments, and you're talking about collecting lien waivers, collecting insurance, collecting payments, collecting, cutting checks to banks. Like, traditionally, all of these things have been living in a whole slew of systems. And I think that's one of the things that's always slowed us down, is the fact that a lot of things haven't really talked, but now we've seen this introduction of a more integrated approach, a more integrated platform. How do you think that's changing the perspective from a financials and a risk perspective?
Well, I think that, particular to us, I do think that even good intentions may end up being a little bit overwhelming. So I don't want to not say that it's been overwhelming for our operational teams, because you're introducing change, and you're introducing new concepts, and you're also introducing new technologies. And so that is still a challenge, and operations have to figure out how to still build the building while you're telling them, we're going to embrace this new technology. And so I don't want to downplay the fact that it's always a challenge, and it's always important to make sure that you're partnering with the right people in the operational side. But one of the things that I try to embrace, and I try my teams to embrace as well, and at the executive level, is to keep it simple. Of course, the solutions may still, be from different platforms, but stick to something. And in our case, we have Procore, and we have to make sure that we build around Procore. It's not that fear of, is Procore going to take over? Well, you know what? If it does, it's fine, because we have to continue building around the solution that we are committed to. In our case, data analytics, I said Power BI. There's days that someone comes and tells me, have you heard what Tableau did, or what Domo and all this? And I'm like, we have to stick to the solutions. We have to commit to them and really leverage what that solution is. And I think that mentality has helped us. And I think that is what, keep it doable. Otherwise, technology changes every day. And you have to make sure that you are consistent.
Yeah. And one of the things that was thinking about as you were talking earlier around your millennial approach to things is there have been a generation of CFOs in those roles who have gone through an ERP transformation, and there have been some failures. I remember being on stage with a CFO who said, I just want to go on record. If we do another ERP transformation, I'm putting my retirement in tomorrow. And he was serious. I think shortly after that, they actually did go through an ERP transformation, and he didn't retire. But when we think about some of those mistakes that are happening, I'd love to get your perspective on what are those first steps you should really be considering when thinking about a pretty big business transformation like that.
Yeah, so in my career, this would be my second ERP transformation, and I've done also project portfolio integrations for a whole back then it was like a 1.4, 1.5 billion organization. And so I've had my fair share of failures when it comes to this process.
Yeah.
Part of it in the first one, and I'm glad I wasn't the lead, but I was a person who would say, I'll do it, I'll go ahead and manage this project. But I wasn't the person responsible for it, but I was a project manager of the implementation to some extent. And so I think that I've learned that it's not as easy as it looks. It's also, to your point, if you've gone through this, you kind of get PTSD and you're like, I don't want to do this again. But
I heard that said, literally PTSD.
Yeah, it's PTSD because you know the challenges that come with it. And one of the things, or some of the things that to anyone hearing this, I would say is don't underestimate things such as making sure you have the right resources. It sounds cliche, and of course we all, but make sure you have the right resources from all the business parties involved operationally, training, development. Because like I remember the first time I went through one of these, I was like, okay, we had a pretty short schedule. The president of the company gave us a goal, and we didn't know how to challenge that, and we should have known, you know, to be. You still have to be pretty aggressive, but you know, let's break it down and make sure that there's milestones and the meaning of those milestones. Training and development, you know, you come with this great new software that is going to affect the whole company, and you go live and you think that the out-of-the-box solutions training-wise are going to be enough. Of course they're not. And there has to be an approach to it. And now we know better. I think the millennials, we know better that we all learn in different ways. We have different ways. Some people are visual, some people are listen, some people have to go through it. And so you have to make sure that you have you have to make sure that all that great work that you go and put into testing, which I don't even want to start talking about testing. I mean, I can go on about crystal reports and the nightmare that is. But you do all these things and then you forget the end user and make sure that everyone feels comfortable with the solution and that you brought them along knowing why are you doing what you're doing. And so that is so important. And I feel like that's why many CFOs, after they go through one, they're like, I'm done. And then what that means is that you want to go 12, 15 years without changing that software. And you're just building around. So it's, you know, it's another circular reference, which is, you know, do I really need to do this?
Well, and I think that's, you brought it up at the beginning of that statement. It's why it's so incredibly important to get all the stakeholders involved, like, and understand how they use it, how they're going to interact with it. Because then you can start to plan for, how do I need to train them? What level of impact is this going to be? Is this going to be a huge change for them? Or, you know what, they're in the software once a month. It's not that big of a change for them. So we can focus our efforts in other areas. And I think that's the part of the planning and the resourcing that people don't necessarily lean into enough when they're thinking about a big change like an ERP, and why we see so many struggles that happen out there. But the technology is moving so fast today that, like, I don't think it's realistic that, like, probably the last 20 years that you're going to stay on the same ERP system or the same version.
Companies change. The needs of a company 10 years ago are different, especially if you've grown or you have acquired or if you've merged, you know, whatever the case is, or you're national and you used to be regional, you know, those things impact your technology.
So I wanted to follow up with that and think about, you know, not necessarily the technology or the data, but the role of the financials leader inside of these organizations. What are you seeing as the biggest thing moving forward that financial leaders, you know, CFOs need to be concerned with and need to be thinking about?
You have to know your business. It doesn't matter if you're in construction, manufacturing, healthcare, you have to understand the business. You can't come in and have these new KPIs that you're certain and sure they're going to move the business. You have to understand what operationally is needed, what from a sales perspective is needed for your business. You have to understand what your clients want and need, and you have to make sure that you understand the product. And so as a CFO, typically that wasn't something that, 20, 30 years ago was expected. It was expected you were going to manage cash flow, that you were going to make sure that you had the banker relationships, and you were going to have these things figured out. And you still do, but you also have to make sure you're in the community. You have to make sure you understand what the product is. You have to make sure that you know what are the things that your partners need. And for me, even things like understanding the schedule of the project, understanding the technology, the change orders, make sure that you know your product and you know the differences between each market. If you're building industrial, you're building senior living. In our case, we do industrial senior living. We do a lot of manufacturing. We do a lot of student housing. All these different products that we make, as a CFO, you need to understand what are the difference between them. Who is leading each region? What are the needs different? And we have offices in Phoenix, Richmond, Denver. So what are the different needs that each region has? Kansas City. So those are things that as a CFO, usually where, you stick to the numbers, the accounting of it. And, I say that no more is applicable.
Yeah, I love that. I think, there's an opportunity for the CFO to play a much bigger role
exactly
in the business, I think, than there ever has been before. But that also requires getting much, much closer to the business so that they can add more value. And I love your background, and I love the path that you came, because it's non-traditional.
Right.
And I've worked with other CFOs who've come kind of like a different path, and they always seem to understand the business in a different way that many of the CFOs who come a very traditional and were just from an accounting background may not. And so I guess like my advice, or maybe your advice, is that like for those who come from a very traditional background, get out there and see it, understand it. And those who are like, hey, I'm not an accountant, I don't necessarily want to be a CFO, maybe it's actually not a bad thing to explore, because you might have things to offer to the business that others didn't necessarily have.
Yeah, I think both ways work. I have great people in my team. I built a fantastic team that have the strongest accounting CPA background that, helps us to make decisions every day. And we're an ESOP, and so you have to make sure that all the regulations are in, because it's very regulated in the sense of valuation, and make sure that there's, a whole process that guarantees the value of the ESOP. But even if you come from a very traditional, make sure that you go to the job sites and that you meet with the superintendents just as much as you would with a project engineer, and understand what they do. For me, that comes very natural, but I think that for my teams now, everyone who has a non-traditionally construction background, they know that they are expected to have conversations with everyone in the company who is out on the field. And we go to the field and we walk and we talk and we see it. And I think that makes us good partners.
One of the things that you had mentioned in our prior conversation was around this idea of introducing meaningful metrics. So looking at the aging of pending change orders rather than implementing superficial cost-cutting measures. I found that story so fascinating. I'd love if you could tell that, because I think it does speak to a new way of thinking about the value a CFO brings to the business. Tell us that story.
Yeah, so I was in one of the companies I'm never going to forget, we had a new CFO. We were going through a few years of change. And, one of the first things that I remember this role come and say was, we're going to start, maybe one of the things that we can do is Cuttingcuss, right? And we had to do some measures of managing, and it was around the idea of maybe cutting lunches. I remember that lunches, like our expenditures for operations and for the company. And I was like, absolutely not. You don't understand the business, right? You don't understand that going to eat lunch, going to have those conversations, that's what makes us collaborative sometimes, that those relationships, making sure that our operations team feel that ease of, we're going to go and take people to eat lunch. And maybe in some other industries is more measured, but in the construction industry, it's important. You want that. You want those things. You want people on the field to feel comfortable getting lunch and doing things like that. And I always look back and I'm like, well, that wasn't a fantastic idea. And that was a thought process that, for many years we think Cuttingcuss and cut this and cut that. And
exactly
around Brinkman, we talk about, I don't come and say things like that, because I don't think those are the needle movers. I rather more understanding our aging on change orders. I rather more understanding our forecasting of our most likely fee and maybe forecast the best case and a worst case scenario and try to understand how do we get to that best case and what do the team need in order to make that best case happen? Do they need more support, more resources, or how do we prevent that worst case from happening? Do you need more resources? Do you need more operational oversight? Whatever that looks like. But those concepts in my experience have had more impact to the whole business than going and say, as traditionally a CFO would say, well, we're going to cut this, we're going to do this and that is, I think, part of the millennial approach and the forward-looking approach that we're like, let's do the things that are going to help the business.
And so when you think about that, if you were to put that into a value statement, what would you say in your mind the value of the CEO? How is that quantified? What is the statement about that value the CFO brings to the business?
Well, I tell everyone, or I tell myself that it can be the numbers. The numbers is not the way that, you get to someone, is that partnership. So for me, as what you can bring as a CFO shouldn't be a KPI. It should be the business partnership. It should be what you can accomplish together. And, because KPI sometimes means something in different stages. It's not the same if you are a $3 billion company, a $2 billion company, than if you're a $450 million company. There's things that you will be able to weather differently depending on who you are. And I think that's why numbers, you have to be able to tell a story. You have to be able to understand how that affects the business and how that may change over the next 5 and 10 years.
So clearly not just thinking about the way that you're setting yourself up for the future, but bringing the future closer to today to make sure the business is ready for whatever happens.
Because sometimes it's going to take years before everyone understands why you're doing something or why you're trying to measure something. So I think having that vision and sharing that vision pretty close to all the executives, and then breaking down that accountability amongst the next levels, whether that is vice presidents, whether that is executive level, director level, is bringing them on board on the vision of the next 10 years, 5 years. I think that is key.
One of the things that we're finding very interesting as we're talking to more executive leadership today is around the ESOP structure of a business. And we're finding a lot of similarities in, I guess, when you look at employees differently as a commodity or something on a P&L chart versus a shareholder. Tell me about the ESOP structure and how that has really made a difference for you in the CFO role and how you think about what you're doing.
Yeah, so Brinkman, we're 100% employee owned, and you don't have to be 100% employee owned, but I think that many companies embrace that because it really brings the people to be part of the culture of the company. You got to think about ESOPs as wealth creator for everyone in the organization. And I think people understands that it's a fantastic benefit. And actually, I shouldn't say they understand. Sometimes it takes years for them to really see the benefit of an ESOP. The easiest way I can explain it for people is think about it as a 401k that you are not funding. 401k comes part of you and companies match. And of course, we still have that. But I tell everyone, this is something where the company, at the end of the day, depends on our performance. We fund that for you, and it's a retirement. And so that is a tricky thing because not a lot of our project engineers, project managers out there may be thinking about retirement right now. But when you see what it does for wealth creation, it's just, you have to then and be engaged with the company because you can see the value for it. And as a structure, I think that for us, it has helped us to provide transparency. And I think it's one of the things that I'm working on with the executive level. Yeah. We're still very infant in that stage, but we want to make sure that our employees understand what are the key metrics that can help you to understand what can do that to your wealth creator, to the wealth creation of all the employees. And so technology has to help us to provide communication. It has to, because we have to do mass communication. You have to provide information that is somewhat complicated of the company, and you have to break it down. And for that, you have to have data that is digestible, charts, graphs, forecasts. We do, for instance, also a calculator. So maybe it's a difficult concept, but if I give you a calculator where you put your salary, you put growth of the company for the next 10 years, and you play around with it, then you're like, oh, okay, so if I stay because I want to stay at Brinkman for the next 10 years. This is
Exactly.
what it does. But that is having the right infrastructure to communicate a complicated topic for employees.
Well, and I think it also introduces a sense of ownership of everybody in the company, because now they're thinking, hey, if we're more profitable, that actually directly impacts me versus maybe just, the people who own the company. And I think people tend to make better decisions when they take a step back from maybe their individual role, their individual project, and are thinking as a whole. I think that makes a huge difference.
And for us, the challenge executives is to make sure that we talk about profit, but we also talk about culture, right? So we're not just looking at profit for sake of profit, but how can that helps us as a whole as a company? And that is a tricky thing for CFOs, because we may be more often talking about the profitability and the growth, but it's a balance. We have to make sure this is something that ultimately, again, I'd like to say it's a wealth creator for our employee owners, and what a very unique thing is for someone. There's only about 5,000 companies in the U.S. that are ESOP. That's not a lot.
Small fraction.
Very small. Yeah,
right.
Very small fraction. All right, so we're at the point in time where we ask you 5 rapid fire questions. So our first rapid fire question is, what book are you currently reading or listening to that you would recommend to someone else?
Choose Strong by ultramarathonist Sally McRae.
Where do you go to find a different perspective and to get something that's not normally a perspective that you would usually get?
Podcasts, and I go on LinkedIn.
What recommendation or advice would you give to your younger self if you could give that today?
Stop and smell the roses.
What innovation or technology do you think is going to shape the future of construction?
AI, but for learning and development.
If construction had one tagline to describe it, what would it be?
Reimagining what is possible, one building at a time.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and sitting down with us. I did kind of start saying I definitely wanted to bring the experts and the heavy hitters in to explain it to us, and I appreciate that you've done that. But I think that a couple takeaways are the role of a CFO is changing. The qualifications, the qualities, some of the skill sets that we'll see from the CFO suite will be a little bit different, and they already are. You're obviously an example of that. But what I really heard loud and clear was how important communication and connecting to the culture of the business is for making sure that you're really able to leverage your position within the business to get a little more proactive and forecast versus managing a reactive business, which to me, that's when transformation happens, when we're really able to see that shift occur. And truly it comes down to the culture to allow the entire company to feel like they're a part of that. So Sam, thank you for coming and sharing your story with us today. It was really great to hear how your work at Brinkman is transforming their business.
I greatly appreciate having you here.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
And we want to say thank you to all of those of you who joined us. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And we will continue bringing you the stories of leaders who are transforming their business, harnessing the power of construction.